This is it, folks. The time came pretty early for the Digital Circus final episodes trailer to drop. What's up, guys? It's Willie. And recently, the Amazing Digital Circus Episode 9 trailer just dropped, which came mad early than what to be expected. Since at the time of its release, we're still way more than 2 months away from the episode's actual release day. And furthermore, Episode 9 is also going to come 2 weeks earlier in theaters, which the concept was met with a bit of backlash from fans because it leads to frustrations of having to avoid any sort of spoiler within the 2 weeks before the episode's official release on YouTube. But anyway, we got the trailer and there's really only such a minimal amount of details it has shown pertaining to the hour-long finale. However, it does provoke a lot of fun ideas and theories to cover on throughout this video, and frankly, I'm going to be discussing a major speculative theory based on this trailer and elaborate on that through supportive and collective evidence from obviously the story up to this point, even including some lore that consolidates its mirrors within this theory, and also some behind-the-scenes information like some of the leaks that Gooseworks has made from Tumblr. I'll be taking those information into account as well. Now, in most cases, I would do like those typical trailer breakdowns after they had just released. However, because I'm releasing this video a bit later, I think the time has kind of passed on that, and I really just don't want to continue retreading something that has been covered by many other creators already. So I'm going to dispense that idea and hop into a more speculative and theorized direction with this video. So right away, the trailer starts off with where he had just left off with the now desaturated Digital Circus and the cast just being mortified by the new reality they're in, and it's interlaced with a series of voice lines from some of the cast in a very sobering and somber tone. Then we move on to shots of Jax represented in a very unpleasing visuals, even one of them being a full-on static silhouette of his body. Then we get to a few more shots of ambiguous things that are set to happen in the episode, and to wrap it up, we have an interaction with Jax and Ribbit where we get this voice line.
Have you ever done something that you regret?
Which, while the trailer portrays it as is seemingly coming from Ribbit, there's a chance that it's actually from a different character, and instead it's adding this narrative context that alludes to something meaningful in this interaction. But that does sum up the trailer for you with some text at the end announcing the opportunity for fans to experience it in theaters as early as they can be. So that right there sums up the episode 9 trailer that only really shares a wee bit of stuff, which the ambiguity obviously leaves a lot up in the air. However, just based on this preview alone, it's certainly clear that Jax is going to be the central character of this episode alone, thus basically being another episode centered around him. Sort of in my eyes, a little more glorified version of episode 6, because unlike that episode, there's a lot more deep lore that's going to be fully explained, as we even saw with that brief scene with Ribbit. Now, the whole idea that Jax is getting the central focus this episode did lead to some mixed reactions from fans. And I understand if you don't like Jax. That's totally reasonable on what your opinions are. However, what I don't find invalid is when those don't recognize that Jax has had a built-in storyline to lead up to something. As to go for a bit of something in retrospective, from the beginning, Jax came off as this very mischievous sort of character who takes pleasure in acting cruel towards others, and this is the sort of persona that he would add across the first few episodes until we get to episode 6, where everything starts to really shift in his character, and especially when Pomni herself would catch on to the true meaning of his antics, leading to him expressing complete denial in utter desperation to mask off his true self, and in other words, his fear of showing vulnerability. Following this event, Jax would just become more distant with the cast, but at the same time would start minimizing his usual mischievous persona, which in turn creates a new sort of direction of development with his character moving on with these last few episodes, and we continue to see signs of Jax continuing to show that sense of vulnerability and feelings through subtle signs despite his quick attacks to avert those ideas about him. And one thing to really add on to this is that Jax is clearly sensitive to the concept of showing feelings, as once someone or somebody is able to latch onto him, he completely flies off the hook and pushes away others as his act with coping with his own sort of issues. This is conjunction with the element of him masking himself as he doesn't want to expose himself or his emotions to the reality of things. And this does fully summarize the idea and story of Jax up to this point prior to the finale. And the reason why I'm explaining Jax's side in particular, as in conjunction to episode 9 branding him as the central figure, it's been elucidated by Gooseworks herself that Jax shares the main character material with Pomni.
It's like building up the show to be about Pomni and Jax.
And yeah, some folks could be like, she could just be lying, since Gooseworks is notorious for just BSing things to really shake things up for the audience, but this is one in particular that should be taken into face value, especially when the narrative of the show completely lines up with her stand. stands. And honestly, Jax's story has been building up for something, and this series has its merits to completely explain and explore on things more in-depthly, so they're not left on a half-baked scale. This is all evident enough to align with the direction the show is headed towards this finale. And a couple more things to mention is that, one, I believe there was a mention that the type of audience that would be able to bear with the show are strong Jax fans, and so everything is viable to that sentiment. And also, Kane's voice actor also recalled that Michael Kovac, the voice actor for Jax, hasn't had his best performance come out yet.
Michael, his best stuff is yet to come.
Which, I mean, there's only one episode left, so clearly what we're looking forward to is something that's very grand for Jax's role in this finale. This does sum up everything that we know for sure. Now to dive into things that are on the speculative spectrum, just based on all the information that I had just elicited, as well as adding on some other info that I had not talked about yet, that could be plausible to my speculation and theory. So what makes Jax the character that's going to be the center of this episode, considering his shallow screen time in episode 8? Well, it's been widely discussed online, and I have a fair share of the idea too that Jax may become that new antagonist, or let's just say final boss for the series, as we've seen that he has not been in a really proper mental state and has been losing his sensibility to remain stable, and it's been evident with the constant panic attacks he's been enduring, as well as his near abstraction in episode 7. And plus, with now Kane out of the picture and with no other clear potential antagonistic force that could become a source of conflict to the plot, it can be feasible that Jax will get that torch passed to him. And what also makes this possible is that with the current state of the Circus now being completely depleted of its fun resources, it could lead to Jax completely losing it and sustaining the antics and masks that he has constantly been occupying. And we know Jax is not in a stable state, as even in the trailer, we have a voiceover of this line from him.
Now we have nothing.
Which speaks in a tone that is directed in a very agitated way. And also, I guess now going into some lore, with that probable flashback scene of him and his now attractive friend Ribbit hanging out, we do get that voiceover line that I already talked about, and it just feels like it's gonna get expanded more upon for Jax's sake. Now, talking things through about this relationship alone, there could be some really dark twists and themes surrounding it, and while episode 9 is probably gonna explain fully on its overall manners, there is still the thought that there's something bad that happened by the end of this relationship between Jax and Ribbit that could have contributed to her abstraction, and thus probably leading to Jax taking his persona to the mischievous level. And I'm also saying this because Google Source has mentioned in a Tumblr response that there would be something that Jax did that would be completely unforgivable, and that one may be a bit loose, as there's a chance that she could have been referring to the button situation at the end of episode 7, though it doesn't completely nullify it out of its landing spots, and it could be meaning of something that happens in the upcoming episode. That one I'm gonna leave up in the air, but I just want to piece that in for the sake of other ideas to speculate on. But in speaking of, the potential chance of Jax doing something unforgiving in episode 9 could be what I've just been talking about, with him being the new antagonist. But there's also another theory that has been going around that I could see going, especially with how the trailer does subtly support the probability, in that Jax, angered by what happened and Kinger being fully responsible for the circus's deterioration, people believe Jax loses it and pushes Kinger into the void, thus fulfilling the unforgivable thing he did. Now, I am two minds of this. I do think this is one to add to the weight on our shoulder, as Kinger really only had one shot in the trailer, and with no other material surrounding him, there is that chance that something bad happened to him that explains his near absence in the trailer, and it could be all a proxy of Jax taking it out on him. But on the other end, it could just be Jax arguing with Kinger and basically bring his morale down, and with that shot of his agitated self clearly chastising Kinger, it's certain that this interaction isn't going to go smoothly between the two. Now, I could say that it could just be a verbal disagreement and just Jax completely isolates himself from others, because we have seen how Jax just tends to keep himself distanced from the cast, and it gets to a point where he just wants to abstract otherwise, which in the last episode everyone has kind of caught on to what his attempts were with his isolation. Now, going a bit more in depthly on how Jax is going to be able to play out his potential role, well, in the previous episode, Kinger had elicited the concept that cast themselves can conjure things, which is not out of the realm of the possibility despite the circus's condition. Now, there's a little issue with that in the fact that Jax had already left the room by the time that Kinger brought that up, though he could have been filled in on that idea from the other cast members off screen, so don't take that out of the equation. So by the chances of him knowing how to do that, it might play a factor into some things that might greatly affect the rest of the cast members. And also, in the trailer, we saw scenes that clearly visualize things prior to the circus's current conditions, and based on what I had just mentioned, there could be a chance that Jax conjures some sort of time travel or flashback to the past in favor of himself, but also at the same time uneventful for everyone around, since that's typical for Jax. From everything of what I'm theorizing here, my theory is that the narrative is going to be pushing for Jax to basically lose his mind and start wreaking havoc having for the remaining cast to deal with, and they must find ways to try and calm him down and get him back to his senses. And in most cases, people are just gonna believe, oh, Jax is gonna abstract, but I just personally don't believe it, and I don't want to jinx it at the same time. But this series has been well built in with its twists and turns, and I don't think they want to make things very blatantly telling on what's really gonna happen, as they pretty much have a history of being able to overturn many fans' theories of what is gonna happen next. And so by that means, despite all the signs being there, oh, Jax is gonna abstract, I just don't think we're gonna go that route. And also at the same time, I just think it would be underwhelming for that to be the resolution for Jax's role on the show, as we've literally just had this little growth arc building up for him, and I think we need some sort of bittersweet way to really fulfill that, and abstracting just doesn't seem suitable for a conclusion to someone's arc there. Now, I know there can be an argument that, oh, Cain has suffered a brutal fate, why can't Jax follow his footsteps? Well, like I said, that's very circumstantial, since Cain was a clear loss cause up to the point before his deletion, as he clearly was that figure that just refused to change for the betters of cast members, thus being why his deletion is a lot more satisfying, especially since he had no signs of growth as well. And I'm not trying to say this with too much confidence or bias coming from me being a huge Jax fan, but definitively, it just wouldn't feel right for the story if there was some sort of demise for Jax, especially how far we have come. And truthfully, at this point, I might dare say that neither of the cast will abstract at all, which completely contradicts my whole stance in believing that there was going to be at least one suffering the fate. But I just think that up until this point, it's probably an idea that has now been forego. But yeah, I don't think it would be apt for Jax in particular with everything. So in my mind, in all of its essence, I theorize that after all of the chaos and franticness that he has been inflicting would eventually come crumbling down on him, and the cast members, maybe Pomni in particular, would sought to snap him out of it. And for what it could be worth, we can finally have the moment of Jax finally giving in and showing emotion, like breaking down or something, and that would be completely fulfilling to satisfy his arc. That would be pretty huge. And I know I talked quite a lot about this theory alone regarding the potential direction with Jax taking over the spotlight. It just feels like we are set up for some narrative like this that, one, will give us a bit more backstory and fully explain lore on Jax, as well as building on a compelling story arc for him that hopefully find a resolution in a bittersweet note. And this pretty much encapsulates probable prime theory that I have episode 9, just from every detail that we have picked up on so far within the scope of the show and exterior information. Now, there could be some other ideas and theories for what it's worth, and I could possibly elaborate on more ideas in the future, probably in short form. Also, yeah, if I have the time to make some leading up to the finale of the show. One of my hopes from this is that if Jax is to be some sort of relentless force, the cast will spend the time to try and get him back in the right state. And while I believe there has been so much talk like, oh, Jax is irredeemable, stuff like that, I hope that the way it would end for Jax is where he would finally break down and would finally give in to accepting reality and facing up to his fear of showing vulnerability. And also because the cast has shown that they truly do look at him as one of them and desire for him to dispense his feeling of isolation from them and actually feel like he's a part of them as well. And whatever the way the show is going to end, at least I want it to be as soothing as it is, especially for Jack finally finding his sense of belonging within the group, and that's what would encompass a perfect outcome to Jax's story alone. But that pretty much wraps up my theories. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and if you have any thoughts of what you think will happen, comment down below. And while you do that, always tap that like and subscribe so you won't miss out on this. With that, I'm signing off here. Gonna see y'all in the next video.